All right. Welcome everyone to our Guava webinar today. The alternative to Google Vault. My name is Sheldon. I am a marketing manager here at Guava, and I'm here with Q Mangus, the director of product marketing here at Guava. I just want to start off by thanking everyone for attending, and hope you get some great stuff out of this. And a couple quick announcements before we start. You may have heard Guava. We were awarded the Best Overall Value and Champion for Content Email Archiving by the Infotech Research Group, which is awesome, but I'm not going to go into detail. I think you might talk about it a little bit later. Second, we've launched, or I said relaunched, our newly redesigned and revamped Guava website. So guava.com. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, go check it out. And lastly, and hopefully within the month, getting the everything set up, we're planning on having live video webinars, changing up some more interview style format, and fingers crossed a little bit more entertaining. But today we're going to do a Q&A session addressing some of the most frequent questions about Google Vault and Retain archiving, on how Retain and Google Vault kind of stack up against each other. For those of you, anyone joining us just a little bit late, my name is Sheldon Mills, and I'm here with Q Mangus, the Director of Product Marketing. And we have a number of kind of frequently asked questions we get that we want to go through. But more importantly, if you have questions, those are the ones we want to address. So please put those in the chat panel or the Q&A panel, and Q will be sure to answer those. Q?
Thanks, Sheldon, and thanks everyone for being here. We're really excited to bring this topic and address some of the things that we've seen and have been discussed with us about, how to archive Google Apps and how Retain works with that, and just be able to answer your questions as well. So we encourage you to ask some questions, and we'll get to those during this webinar.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right into it then. The first question, we get this one all the time. What are some of the concerns that an organization, my organization, have when it comes to archiving? It's really the why. Like, why should me and my organization, company, whatever, why do we need to be archiving?
Great question. And yeah, as Sheldon said, we get this question a lot. I think there's a lot of organizations that understand the need for archiving, but there's a lot of people who still don't see the need for it. And interestingly enough, we get enough people that we talk to at events that actually will say, I don't know why I need to do this. Why should I archive? And the same thing happens when our salespeople are talking to people on the phone and whatnot. There's a lot of people that understand the need, but there's still some lack of knowledge out in the marketplace here about it. So here's just a few. We kind of boiled it down. There's a myriad of reasons why you should, but here's just some reasons why you should. And I kind of we kind of put these, like I said, boil them down into a few different topics, but there's a lot of reasons why you should. But let me just touch on a few of these that we have here up on the screen. So first and foremost, you have a lot of people who, a lot of organizations that can be involved in litigation, right? So archiving is good just as a protection, right? I mean, that's a basic need that a lot of organizations have, and so that's something that you need to think about, and that is being able to perform e-discovery, being able to go back and find messages that have been communicated. So if people have been emailing one another, you can go back, and an archive can be used to go back and find those emails and easily come back and discover those emails in case of litigation. And then an archive should and could be used for other kinds of communication, like social media, like mobile, like instant messaging. And so that's really the idea here. One of the most basic functions of an archive is to be able to go back and find messages and be able to produce those in a format where they can be produced in court, or they can be produced in case of litigation. Which leads me to the other one, which is the exporting to a PDF or exporting to a format that can be used. This is something that is concerning to people. They may have an archive, so this is kind of going along the road a little bit. I know the question was, why should we archive, or what are the reasons? Like I said, there's e-discovery, but then there's the ability to deliver what you've searched, what you've found in the archive in a format that people can use. And that's where it's important to be able to export to PDF. Some other thing, and these kind of go together, is being able to access the archive anywhere at any time. I know that there are limitations in certain archiving solutions that are on the market of where, when, and where you can access it. So that's something that's really important with an archive, is being able to access it at any time. So that's a concern, not really a reason, but that is a concern. So and then also there's the user rights. So I'm kind of answering the question in two different ways. One is why you should archive, and then the other is some concerns that you may have if you're trying to archive. Some other things too is being able to have your users have access to their archive and what rights they have. So moving along more about the why you should archive. Another great one is increasing your system performance. So let's say we're talking about email. So if you have an email system and you have all these messages sitting on that email system, it's going to slow that system down. And especially with Exchange and Office 365, they don't support single instance storage. So every message that is produced, it's going to save a copy of that, and every attachment. So if I send an email to, say, 20 people, Exchange and Office 365 is going to save every version of that email instead of saving it once. And I know we're talking a lot about Google Apps in this one, but just be aware, and I know that there's organizations that are probably on this call that are using both. So if you're using both, just be aware that that single instance storage is an important thing for an archive, but it applies even to Google Apps and Gmail, meaning that as emails are sent out, they're stored on your Gmail system. And now I do understand that that's in the cloud, but even with the fact that Google Apps is in the cloud, as more and more messages are put onto that system, your system is going to slow down. And depending on the plan that you have with them, your costs could go up as well. And that's why it's important to have an archiving system, because what you can do is take those messages, get them off your email system, get them into an archive, and where now the archive, when it's stored, it's single instance storage in the sense of retain in particular. It uses single instance storage, so now your storage requirements are greatly reduced. It also compresses that data, so now your storage footprint is much smaller. You're going to save money in that sense, and your system's just going to run better. And then since I was talking about other systems, so those of you who are on Google Apps, there's probably a good chance that you're using in your organization something else as well. Maybe you're using Exchange, or you have an Exchange server for certain users and Google Apps for others. Or obviously you're probably more than likely using some other type of electronic communication, whether that be social media, instant messaging, or mobile devices. That's another essential reason to archive. And what I mean by that is that those kind of messages are scattered everywhere, right? So let's talk about mobile in particular. If I'm texting and using that for work purposes, how do you ever access that? How do you get oversight of what I'm doing? How do you know what I've been texting to your customers, right? So that's why an archive is essential and important, is to be able to have that oversight. So now you can see what your employees have been communicating via mobile, because it's going to be in the archive, and you can go back and see what's been happening. You can do searches on that. And same thing goes for social media. You can really get a gauge of what's been said and what's been going on in your organization. And then finally, and I know that's not really on the screen here, but something that's really great with archiving is to be able to access information about your company, right? You can go back and go into that archive, you can do searches, and you can find information about what your employees have been communicating, information about projects. And it's just, there's this idea of being able to preserve your corporate memory, your corporate identity, and that can be done through an archiving solution. So a big answer to that question. Just remember that there's a lot of reasons to archive, but some big ones are the e-discovery and compliance. There's that the ability to increase your system performance, being able to easily and quickly get back to those messages and be able to see the overall health of your company.
Awesome, great. There's a lot of reasons why. Let's just jump into the what really. What should a company or government or educational organization, what should they be archiving?
Great, perfect. Let's see if I think I have a slide here on what should be archived. Basically, all electronic communication needs to be archived. So this thought cloud here just kind of has some information about some reasons for archiving and some regulations. But what I'd like to talk about is what an organization should be archiving. So I kind of touched on that a little bit when I talked about why you should be archiving, but really the idea here is that you need to be archiving all electronic communication. And that includes email, obviously. That's the big one, and that's been the case for years. And now with some shifts that have been happening in the way people communicate, mobile's big too. People want to communicate with their mobile devices. They're everywhere, right? And your employees are going to want to be able to access your network and access their email and communicate with employees with the device, whether that's their own personal device or with a device that you issue to them. And so mobile communications need to be archived, and that would include text messages, multimedia messages, phone call logs. Those need to be archived. And then with social media, it's the same idea. If your employees are using social media at work, you need to be able to have oversight of those. You need to be able to archive that, and as well as instant messaging. So the what should be archived is all electronic communication. And in a little more detail, that's mobile communication, social media communication, instant messaging communication. And with email in particular, I know I kind of glossed over that a little bit. With email, you want to make sure that you archive all email messages, all appointments, all attachments, tasks, anything that is really used in your email system needs to be archived as well. So, like I said, appointments, attachments, email messages, etc. Those all need to be archived.
Awesome. That's a good definition. We got the why and the what, and in a minute we're going to get into the how with retain and also about Google Vault. But before that, this is a question we get quite often. Kind of what regulations could affect the what and how of how my company archives? Because depending on the industry, there's different regulations. Can you go into a little bit more detail on that?
Absolutely. So I'll just stick on this slide because it has a few of them listed. So some regulations. So just so that we all are on the same page, really no matter what industry you're in, you need to be archiving all electronic communication. And you'll probably ask yourself why. You might be in a corporate situation where a lot of these heavy regulations don't apply to you. However, there is the need because of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. And what the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure say, and this applies to anyone, is that if you're involved in litigation, you need to quickly and easily be able to produce any communication that applies to that case. And so if let's say you have a wrongful termination suit against you, right? And you're in court and the court's going to ask you for any communication pertaining to that case, anything that was communicated to that employer back. Well, can you easily produce that? Can you get that back quickly? That's where an archiving solution comes into play, is that most solutions, and Retain in particular, would be able to give you the ability to quickly and easily grab that information, be able to quickly and easily get back to that information, do that search, and pull that information back so that you can produce it. So now let me talk in particular about certain regulations. So for healthcare, there is HIPAA and high tech. And the big thing there is that, so for those of you on this call that are involved in healthcare or in that industry, just be aware that the big outline with HIPAA and high tech is that personal health information, PHI, cannot be communicated. You can't be sending that personal information via mobile, via text messages, via email. And so that's why you need to be able to archive, is to be able to quickly and easily get back and make sure that's not happening, have that oversight, and then be able to prove it if you're ever involved in some kind of audit or regulatory investigation. And then for financial organizations, that's the big one, right? If you're in a financial organization in the financial industry, you have so many regulations. I just have to put it frankly. You've got the Dodd-Frank Act, which particularly mentions mobile. So that one is basically you have 72 hours to produce any communication that is required by an auditor. So once again, you better have the ability to quickly and easily get to those communications, mobile in particular. Now you've got the SEC has requirements, FINRA has requirements, FSA. So there's a lot of regulations, and basically what they boil down to is that you need to be able to prove that your employees are not sending insider trading tips, that they're stating things as fact. If they're stating that a stock is a sure bet, a slam dunk, you need to be able to go back and prove that your employees are not communicating that kind of information, and that they're not communicating it in an inappropriate manner, in ways that they shouldn't be. And so that's where an archive comes into place, is that you need to be able to go back and prove that your employees are not communicating that way. I'm going to talk in a little bit about some ways to prevent that, but just know that those are the regulations that apply to financial. And then if you're in a government organization, whether that's local, state, or federal, there's different regulations that apply as well. And the big one that's going to apply across the board is the Freedom of Information Act. So employees need to be able to, you are going to need to be able to produce communication if you're involved in a Freedom of Information Act request. So if somebody comes and approaches your public entity and needs information, they can obviously ask for Freedom of Information or submit a FOIA request, and you need to be able to produce information that pertains to that request. So those are the regulations that apply to you. That was a brief overview. I would suggest that you go through and you learn more about learn more about what regulations apply to you.
Great. Yeah, if you have any specific questions on particular regulation, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can love to talk with you more about that. Cool. Well, let's jump into the nuts and bolts about Google Vault and Retain. So, since this webinar is about Google Vault, what are some of the limitations of Google Vault?
I'm going to talk just for a quick minute about the advantages of Google Apps Email or Gmail, and then I'm going to hit on what Google Vault's lacking. If any of you on this call are using Gmail, you probably know some of the benefits, right? That it's easy to use, it's a well-known interface. There's quite a number of people using Gmail out there, and so by using it in a corporate environment, your end users are going to easily be able to understand that interface. You can access it on mobile. It's accessible anytime, and it's built for the cloud. Gmail is a great solution for collaboration, and we understand that a lot of people are using this and may be tempted when they purchase Google Apps to just add that Google Vault on top of it. However, there are some limitations that Google Vault has, so I'm going to touch on that really quick. So the first and foremost and the biggest one is that Google Vault only archives Gmail. It only archives those email messages. And so this slide here is a little bit of the features of it, but just know that it's just a Gmail archive. Some other things that Google Vault does have is there are some legal holds, they have some search, and then you can, and there's some audit reports. So there are some good things that Google Vault has, and like I said, it may be tempting to get that because of these things, but just know that there's quite a few things that are lacking, and that's what I'm going to touch on here. And once again, to go back to what I was saying, the Google Vault Archive only archives Gmail. So if you have other kind of electronic communication, let's say you have another email system in place, you can't use Google Vault, in addition to Gmail. If you are wanting to archive social media, once again, that can't be done via Google Vault. If you want to archive social media, mobile, etc., the idea is that it's only archiving that, those Gmail messages. So it's not a complete archive or a unified archive. Furthermore, you've got the e-discovery. There's some areas that are lacking there. The Google Vault could potentially be more expensive for you depending on how your organization is set up. There's this other one of dead costs, and I like to talk about that, and that is really if you have users that are not currently using inactive users, they are going to have a cost here. And I'll get into that. I'll get into the specifics of each one of these, but just be aware there's some other ones. So the other thing is it's cloud. It's only cloud. So there may be organizations on this call that are in need of a solution that's on-prem. There's a lack of archive control, no support for multiple email addresses per user. There's some export issues, lack of message restore, and there's an inbox-only archive. So let me go into some details about that really quick. I know I started to get into some details, and I realized I wanted to give you an overview first. So let's talk a little bit about, so we talked about the Unified Archive. We talked a little bit about the high costs. Like I said, Google Apps for Business is about $5 per month per user. And then Google Vault is an additional $5 per month per user. So you're talking it's double what you're currently paying for Google Apps for Business. And then, of course, to be able to archive social media mobile, you're going to have to implement another solution. So the idea here is that by having one solution for all electronic communication, you're going to save money over time. And it's going to be a better overall, your total overall costs are going to be lower. And then, of course, with the dead costs, and I touched on that for a minute, but the quote exactly from Google is, if a user leaves your organization and you want to continue preserving that user's data in Google Vault, a Google Apps administrator should suspend the user's account. Email data is preserved for a suspended account, but the account cannot receive new email. Note that suspended accounts are billed the same as active accounts. So that's the quote there. So if you have users that leave your organization, you're going to have to continue to pay for them to be able to access that archive. And that, that can add up quickly. Okay, then back to the cloud. So this could be, depending on your organization, I would imagine that most organizations on this call, that's okay, that they're going to the cloud only. But maybe you don't or can't go to the cloud. There are government organizations that are required to have something on premise, or they need a private cloud. And with Google Vault, it's only available in the cloud, and it is not a private cloud; it's a public cloud, right? And for various reasons, depending on your organization, you may need to have something that's on-prem or private. Another interesting thing is that there's not support for multiple email addresses per user. So this is quite common, right, for different organizations that one user can have different email addresses depending on what they're doing. This would be very pertinent for organizations that are kind of like an umbrella company where an employee, is representing different branches of that company, and then have a different email address for each branch. Google Vault doesn't support those multiple email addresses per user. They just have one. The other idea here, as I touched on that overview, but getting into a little more detail, is that lack of archive control. Right? With Google Vault, you have no idea, no control over where the data is stored or who has access to your data. And really, Google won't even identify the exact location of your data. So once again, that may not be an issue for some organizations. However, for others, that's a big thing, especially government organizations, because there's tons of requirements on where they have that information, especially if you're in a sensitive government branch. That data needs to stay in your country. So let's say that you're in the United States, more than likely you have a requirement that that information stays locally and or that you keep that on premise. So that's the other things. You don't have that archive control. Next, there's a big thing with exporting. I know we can't raise hands here, but how many of you use Mbox? I would imagine that nobody uses the Mbox format. That's a proprietary format from Google, and the problem with it is that if you need to export from your archive and give that to legal, as an example, is your legal team going to be able to interpret what an Mbox format is? And there's, if you go and look to Google and ask them what Mbox is, they will say, well, an Mbox file can be opened in some email programs, such as Thunderbird. I don't know what that is really. I would imagine not many of us use that. The other thing is it says if you can't open an Mbox file with your email program, you can convert the files to another format like PST, but you'd have to use a third-party tool. So once again, that's difficult, right, if you need to be able to give that off. So you're going to have to now invest in another tool to be able to convert that to something else. And then they say that you can use a text editor such as Notepad or WordPad. You'll be able to see the headers, senders, and recipients, but you're not going to be able to see attachments. You can't view them in the text editor. So once again, it's going to be incomplete. So when it comes to the basic needs of an archive, which we were talking about, which is the e-discovery, that's going to be hard there. And we'll talk a little bit more of that in just a minute. Then you have this idea of message restore. If you have a user that inadvertently deletes a message from their inbox and they need to get that back and you know that it's in the archive, it's difficult to restore it from Vault. Once again, you have to export a message to an Mbox file. Then you have to use a third-party solution to import the file into Gmail. Or you can use a third-party tool to change it to a PST and then use Google Apps Migration for Exchange to import it. That's no joke. That's what Google suggests, is that you either use a third-party vendor to import the Mbox file, and there are some vendors out there, or you convert it to a PST and use Google Apps Migration for Exchange to import it. So that's pretty hard. That is a difficult thing to take a file from your vault and get it back to your email inbox. Don't you want to just be able to hit restore? So much easier, right? So that could be a big sticking point for many of you on this call, and for many organizations who are looking to archive Google Apps, is that particular piece. And then another thing is that Google Vault only archives messages that are in the inbox. So if other messages that hit Gmail, or if you want those archived, like maybe you want some things that are in the spam folder or other things like that, those are not archived in Google Vault. And then now I talked once again, I already kind of touched on this, but one of the big reasons to archive is for e-discovery, and Google Vault lacks some of that e-discovery like we talked about, is that export with Mbox. There is some other things that are missing, like there is no redaction. There's no ability to take your Gmail messages and strike out or redact information that is not pertinent to a case or pertinent to a FOIA request, as an example. So that's a big problem. Next, you have legal or litigation holds. There is litigation holds in Google Vault. However, if an administrator deletes an account, all legal holds on that account are deleted as well. So that means, if you have users that leave or users that are deleted out of Gmail, out of Google Apps, they're going to be gone in Google Vault as well. So now how are you going to be able to produce that information? Just because a user's not in Google Vault doesn't mean that you don't have to produce that information in a court case. So you need to be able to have litigation holds that stay on no matter what. And then the retention policies are somewhat lacking. As we talked about before, inactive accounts are either deleted or you have to continue to pay for them. So if your retention policy is, all messages have to stick around for 3 years, but you have employees that leave during that 3-year retention period, you'll have to continue to pay for those accounts. So those retention policies are lacking a little bit here. And then, as I stated before, there's the exporting issue. So I don't want to harp too much on this, but just know that for most organizations, Google Vault archiving is not going to be a good solution because of these limitations. And I would encourage you to really look at what you need and realize that Google Vault, even though it is a Google product and it seems like an easy add-on to Gmail, it doesn't have all the things that you need in an archive. All those reasons that we talked about for archiving are kind of not available in Google Vault.
Wow, that was a lot. If you have any specific questions about one of the things that Q talked about, please let us know. Well, let's just jump into, so what makes Retain different from Google Vault then?
Perfect. So let's hit on Retain a little bit. So to begin with, what makes Retain different is that idea of unified archiving. And that is where Retain is different than most other archiving solutions on the market, is that Retain has one archive for all electronic communication. So these here that you can see on the screen are the supported platforms. So first of all, you have, obviously, Gmail is supported. Additionally, you have Exchange, Office 365, and GroupWise. All those email systems are supported in Retain. So if you're using Gmail right now, but you have certain people that are on Exchange, Retain will support both and will archive in one central archive. And let's say that you're using Gmail today, Google Apps, and you want to eventually move to Office 365, or you're going to have some users that are using Office 365. Retain will support that, obviously. We'll support both of those and archive in one central archive. Now, since we harped and touched a lot about the idea that you need to archive more than just email, Retain supports that as well. Retain supports archiving. Actually, it supports monitoring and archiving for social media and web searches. So Facebook, Yahoo, Link, Google Hangouts, Link is now Skype for Business, so Skype for Business when it comes to instant messaging and AOL. Then for social media, it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Yammer. All of those communications are archived in Retain in the same central archive that where email is archived. And as well as search. So when your users go to Google or YouTube, Bing, Yahoo, or Wikipedia, and they enter a search, those search terms are archived as well. And what's great with search and social media and instant messaging is that Retain takes it a step further, where we actually actively monitor and filter and block social media, instant messaging, and these search terms. So let's say we talked a lot about regulations earlier, about having an archive helps you comply with these regulations and prove that something bad didn't happen. Well, by having a monitoring and filtering solution, you can actually be proactive and make sure that those communications never actually happen. And that's something that's big in Retain. So you can create policies to be able to prevent your users from posting things to social media that violate policies, and you can set that up in Retain. And you can do the same thing for instant messaging, that if there's certain things that you don't want your users communicating, you can prevent that as well. And the same goes for web searches. And then finally, we have mobile. So as your employees are using their Android, BlackBerry, or iOS devices, we have the ability to archive the communications that they're using, their text messages, their phone call logs, BBM messages, PIN messages. Retain archives that into one central archive. And then in particular, since we talked about the Google Vault limitations, just as a reply to that is Google App customers, those using Gmail, you will have that platform-agnostic unified archive, meaning that when the messages are archived in Retain, if you ever do need to move on to another solution, you have an archive that can be used with any of those other email solutions. So you can archive everything from Gmail into the archive and then implement a new solution if you choose to, and that new solution will now be archived in Retain, and you can go back and see all your old messages in that platform agnostic format. And then, of course, with the Unified Archive, you have the ability to archive all electronic communication. And that goes for this multi-platform support, right? No matter what you're using when it comes to your email or your electronic communication, Retain will support that. And that goes along with, as I was stating, right, that all the platforms that Retain supports, you have the ability to archive them into one central archive. Now, let me touch a little bit on the e-discovery tool since we talked about that. So with Retain, you have e-discovery tools, so you can easily search the archive. You can place litigation holds. You can tag messages. You can export these messages to PDF, PST, and there's even a standalone archive viewer. And what's great about the standalone archive viewer is you can actually take that and put it on a portable media like a DVD or a CD or a jump drive, and hand that off to a legal team. So if you don't want a legal team accessing your full archive and searching it there, you can actually perform a search, export that to that standalone archive viewer, and hand that off. And the archive viewer it's fully indexed, and it has tools in there as well. So if they need to search that archive viewer, that subset of the archive, a legal or other auditor can search that, and then from there they can perform redaction, strikeout, etc., those kind of things that you need. And then going along with that is this ability to meet compliance regulations, right? We talked about how these regulations really require that you're archiving more than just email. With Retain, you have the ability to do that. And you have a full audit trail, meaning that you'll be able to go back and see what users have done. Named users, auditors, administrators, you'll be able to see what they've accessed, what they've exported, what kind of searches they've done. So you have that audit trail, which is required through a lot of these regulations as well. And with Retain, you have a access control list, which means that you can grant different rights to different users within the archive. So you can allow your end users to view their own personal archive, and you can allow the administrators and other named users to access different parts of the archive or the full archive if you wanted to do that. And then, of course, I touched on the exporting, right, that Retain can export to PST, PDF, and the portable export viewer, the standalone archive viewer. And then with Retain, you have the ability to archive on-premise or in the cloud, either way. So if you need to be archiving on-prem, what's great is you can have a cloud email system with Google Apps, Gmail, and then you can have an archive on-prem if you choose to, and if you're required to, or you can also archive in the cloud. And then the last thing that I'll touch on a little bit here in particular is that no charge for inactive users, right? So if a user leaves the company and you want to continue to archive them, that's not going to eat up one of your seats, right? You're going to be able to have that person and have those messages from that individual archived and in the archive without being charged for them, and all the legal holds remain intact. So that's really what makes Retain different from Google Vault.
Awesome. Actually, one of the questions I was going to get to was regarding e-discovery, but you went to good detail about that. Let's see. Let me see. What is my list here? Oh, yes. So in regards to, we actually touched upon this a little bit. Is there anything else in specific with how Retain works specifically with Gmail?
Yes, perfect. So let's go. Yes, here's a good one here. And let me show you this, and then I'm going to show you a screenshot as well. So specifically for Gmail, we call it Retain for Google Apps or Retain for Gmail. Retain archives Gmail messages, so any of those messages that are sent, and then all the Gmail notes as well, and then appointment and calendar items. So these are iCalendar only items, but those are all, those are all archived in Retain. And what's great too, and I'll show you that in just a minute, is that the labels are recreated as well. So all the email messages, the Gmail messages, and then any labels that they're put under, that's recreated in Retain. The other great thing too is that Retain talks directly to the Google Apps server, to the Gmail server. So it's not like you have to sync or it's an SMTP type archiving. No, it's a direct integration with the Google Apps server. So messages are pulled down directly from there using an IMAP connection. So you don't have to worry about messages being archived. It's done directly. So once you set that up, those messages are pulled down directly from Google and put into the Retain archive. In fact, in the most recent Magic Quadrant for Enterprise Information Archiving from Gartner, which was the 2014 one, Gartner actually stated Guava is one of the few vendors that offers native Gmail archiving support, not through SMTP. So once again, if you're running Gmail, Retain has that ability to integrate directly with the Google Apps server. Now, here I just wanted to show you an example. Here is an example of an inbox or a Gmail inbox that was archived, a user that was archived. So as you can see, all messages are archived there, and the labels are pulled over as well. And from here, an administrator can, and if you choose to, you can give users this ability too, but an administrator can place that litigation hold, can make a message confidential, can tag them, can delete messages, can forward them, export them, can restore them. That's the other thing, and I think I missed that when we were talking earlier, is I touched a lot about restoring. That's another great thing with Retain is you can quickly restore a message. So we talked about how Google Vault limits how you can do it, or it makes it difficult. With Retain, it's as easy as what you see here on the screen. You find a message here, click on it, hit the restore button, and now it's restored back to that user's inbox. And then from here you can print. So this is an example of the archive and how it looks. So yes, for Gmail, let me go back here. These are the messages this is what Retain archives, and it does it directly. And then this is the view of what it would look like.
Awesome. That's great. If going back a little bit to, you talked about appointments and things that Retain can archive from Gmail. One of the questions we get a lot is, what should I be archiving from my email system? And could you go into a little more detail with that with Vault?
Absolutely. So yes, when it comes specifically to email, you need to be archiving kind of what we talked about. You need to be archiving all email, all appointments, and then all tasks, and then all attachments. That's the other thing too, is that obviously Retain's going to archive all attachments to these emails, but those are things that need to be archived in there as well. So yes, that's what needs to be archived from email, is emails, attachments, calendar items, tasks. Those should be archived. And then of course you need to be able to archive it in a way that you can easily search it, and then you need to be able to replicate the lists, the labels when it comes to Gmail, and other email systems call them folders, right? You need to be able to replicate that so that you can go back and your users, it looks familiar to your users, and your users can easily browse.
Awesome. Let's see. I just want to throw that out there to everybody again. If you have any question, to put that through in the chat. Here's one that, this is where the rubber hits the road. So, cost, right? What does Retain cost, especially as compared to Google Vault, and kind of is it worth it?
So the cost for Retain is per user or per seat cost. So there is a base cost for the Retain server. So it starts off with that, and there's a per seat cost. And then each module, so the Retain server is going to automatically come with one module, Generally, that's an email module. And then each additional thing, so if you want to archive social media, mobile, web searches, you'd add those on as a module, but that's nominal. And so really where you really start to see your costs go down a lot when compared to Google Vault is when you are archiving those other types of communication. Obviously, one-to-one, it all depends on your organization. So that's the caveat there. So depending on the size of your organization, obviously there's volume discounts. Depending on your industry, there's different pricing. So I can't just tell you the price right now because it would depend on your organization, but just know that it's a per seat and that generally speaking, compared to Vault, it is less expensive, especially once you start to archive other electronic communication. Because what's going to happen is if you implement Google Vault, that's only going to do your Gmail stuff. Now you're going to need something else for all your other electronic communication. So you're going to be spending more. You're going to be you're paying for it twice. And so that's where Retain and the unified archive really saves you money in that total overall cost. And then the question is it worth it? And that's the million-dollar question, right? Should you be archiving? And is it worth it? So this is in general is yes, you need to be archiving. It's going to save you so much money if you're ever involved in litigation. But more than that, you can be able to get those insights into what's going on in your company. You'll be able to see what your employees are communicating. You'll be able to get a feel for the overall health of your organization by going back and seeing what has been said about certain topics and being able to do searches. And so that's where the value comes in. Is yes, it's kind of like an insurance policy, right? If you need it, and you're going to love it when something happens. So an archive, if you get involved in litigation, you're going to love the fact that you have it. But more than that, you're going to use it on a day-to-day basis to be able to go back and search. And it frees up your IT staff's time and resources because they're not going to be bogged down with these requests for restoring email messages or finding something in the archive because your users will have access to it. So yes, there is a cost, but the cost is worth it.
Awesome, definitely. We actually just recently was at an event, was in the elevator talking to some people about what we do, and they were asking about, because Guava it's not just, as Q went into, it's not just email systems, it's social media, it's instant messaging, it's web filtering, and he made the comment of, well, why would anybody ever want to archive text messaging or Facebook? And our coworker said, well, nobody does until you get a subpoena, and his eyes just kind of like went wide, and you can tell that kind of struck a chord with him. And at that point, we walked out of the elevator, and he was left wondering what to do about that. So I guess you probably should have went with him up to his floor to explain that answer, but I'm sure his interest is piqued now. But let's see, Q, is there any, for those familiar with Retain, is there anything new coming out?
So yes, if anyone is on this webinar that is a current Retain customer or has seen it before, you'll probably recognize just right here from this screenshot that it looks different. So in the upcoming release of Retain, which is Retain 4.0, there will be an updated UI, and as you can see here, and there's going to be an upgraded search. We call it the Advanced Search Tool. So the Advanced Search Tool, it's a fully redesigned search tool, and it's we like to call it more of a Google-like or a Amazon-like search. And what that means is that as you start to type, once you get to 3 characters, it's going to give you suggestions, right? So in this particular screen grab, as I started to type out test, it's going to give me all these suggestions that go along with that. The other great thing in this particular view is if you start to type in a username, it's going to pull and tell you what those users are. So the great thing is that it's going to make your searches easier because it's going to give you suggestions on what you should be searching. And this is based on what's in the archive. So the other thing too is it tells you there's a count over here. You can see the number of results based on different things. So the subject, it has a certain number of results, the sender, recipient, domain, attachment type, attachment name, message content, category, and you can put more. You can say what you're going to search in. And so you can quickly and easily see what what that search is, what messages are coming across because of that search, where those messages are, whether that's based on the recipient, based on an attachment, etc. They're organized in the following areas: fields, which is subject, search, recipient, domain, attachment name, message content, and category. Then you've got the scope, which is mail, phone message, appointment, task, note, SMS, MMS, phone call log, PIN, BBM, wall posts, requests, chats, likes, events, status updates. There's a lot on the scope, comments, etc. So then the item source, date ranges, mailboxes, tags. Those are all things that you can search in and you can specify, and you'll see that count. Another great thing is that the search tool removes duplicate records from the search, so you won't see if there's duplicates in there. So you'll only see one hit, so it'll reduce the number of hits if there's duplicates. And then with this search tool as well, it supports limited regular expression terms, or regex terms. So if you're familiar with regex terms and you want to search with that, Retain supports them. So you could search for certain terms like Social Security numbers or credit card numbers, other terms like that, using those regex terms. And then finally, for those who are familiar with Retain and have used it for a while, these columns are all sortable. So, on the date, you can sort by date range. And the subject, you can sort alphabetically, which is a great thing. It will really make your searches that much easier. So that's the big thing there when it comes to what's new, is that new UI and then that new search, which we're really excited about.
Yeah, that should be a pretty awesome, some of these new features with the new release. I believe those are the questions that a lot of our most popular questions, and then a couple of the ones that were asked today. Q, do you see any more in the chat or Q&A?
It looks like there was a question here about Google Hangouts, and I don't think we touched on that. The question is specifically do we archive Google Hangouts? So great question, because I did not hit on that, and I realized that's something I should have hit on. Is one thing to be aware of is Retain does archive Google Hangouts, and what's great is it even archives off-the-record Hangouts. And so what that does is really if a user is using Google Hangouts and is communicating instant messages with Google Hangouts, Retain will archive it no matter what, because of the way that Retain archives social media and instant messaging. So what Retain does is it's a proxy, and so it sits on the firewall, and as messages are coming in or going out of the organization, that goes through the Retain social proxy. So it doesn't matter if a user wants you to archive their instant messaging or not, meaning they turn off and make it off the record, which is a functionality in Google Hangouts. Retain is still going to intercept those messages, is still going to filter them, and it is still going to archive them. And comparing that to Google Vault will only archive on the record messages. So so that's another thing. So when it comes to Google Hangouts, Retain does support them, and it does archive them no matter if they're on the record or not. And that looks like the only other question I saw in there. So that's good, because we didn't get to that. So
awesome. I think that's it then. Are there any last comments you'd like to wrap up with, Q?
No, just thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for your interest. If you'd like more information, please visit us at guava.com. Also, just so everyone is aware, this webinar has been recorded. So if you want to go back and view this or share this recording with others, please feel free to do so. Everyone who registered will get an email with this webinar recording. And also you can visit our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/guavatv to view other webinars. Just once again, thanks everyone for being here, and encourage you to learn more about Retain and how it can benefit you.
Thank you.